But what I tell people is you don't need to prepare for paranoia. You need to prepare for self-reliance.
I've never had a time in my professional life where Americans have been more concerned about their own self-protection.
You know, one of my greatest joys is to bring you really great subject matter experts to talk about the whole concept of putting together your self-protection strategy. And today I've got a guy who I've been wanting to talk to for quite some time. I have a lot of mutual friends and always heard he was a great individual, but when you actually get to talk to him, it's amazing. So he's former Green Beret, then left after becoming, I believe, a master sergeant, and went over to the agency, over to the CIA, worked for them in a contractor mode, and just very, very interesting individual. Now, listen, there are a lot of those guys that are out there. The one thing that I like about Mike Glover from Fieldcraft Survival is that this guy gets it. He is one of the few vets that made the transition to civilian, understood their military skills that he learned, things that he loved to teach, things that he loved to share. And he has embraced training civilians, you know, using a lot of the same skill sets that he got in as a Green Beret to talk about subjects in a way where they can get the benefits, meaning a new person, a civilian, can get the benefits of the best of the special operations community, all the amazing information that those guys get at all the different levels that Mike was able to attain those. Yet Mike makes it very easy for people to understand these concepts. You know, he's a counterinsurgency specialist. He has, you know, tremendous background. His company, Fieldcraft Survival, up in Heber, Utah, is amazing. They do everything. But today, Mike and I have a conversation, and it is about really the state of the world, where we're at right now, how differently we train. You know, when you're talking to new people and civilians, how do we make people, comfortable with the idea of preparedness? And Mike does it in a very sane, sober way. So listen, this is part one. It's a 2-part series, and I hope you're going to really enjoy my interview with Mike Glover. Now, before I go to it, just remember, if you want to start putting your self-protection strategy, if you like listening to these subject matter experts that I bring you, go to timlarkin.com, give us your email. You can start putting your self-protection strategy together completely free with our masterclass. So timlarkin.com. Also, please support the channel. Please, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, share these videos with anybody you think that would be interested in this type of material, because that's how the channel grows, and we really appreciate your help. All right, no further ado, Mike Glover. Mike Glover, thanks so much for joining us today. You know, the intro that I just gave you really kind of lays out who you are and gives all your bona fides. But as I was just talking to you, the one thing that really impresses me is you come from a community that is, extremely elite. You've been with some of the best as far as, tier 1 people, and also other agencies that you've worked for. Yet what I've seen of you, and I haven't had a chance to actually meet you, but I've seen a lot of your content, and I've seen a lot of interviews with you. How you convey that you can go from a really extreme technical conversation with an operator, but then switch it right around. You get brand new civilians that probably have never even thought about, preparedness in any way, shape, or form. And you're really excellent at communicating with them without intimidating them, without using jargon. And I just thought that was interesting. So my question is, when you first started, what was it the Army's training, as far as like the one thing I've noticed about especially guys coming from special forces is you guys really know how to relate to people. You have to work with indigenous people all the time, and language sometimes is a challenge. And so communication skills, I've noticed a lot of guys have great communication skills, but what motivated you to focus on civilians?
Yeah, I appreciate having me on the podcast. I think I learned that early on in my military career. And I joined the Army when I was 17 years old. But I had the opportunity to try out for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington Cemetery. So when I became a tomb guard, part of my duty was to educate people civilians on what the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was and how we should represent ourselves from the U.S. Army's perspective. And that, I think, is where I got really comfortable with interacting with people, but also conveying and communicating a message. And then that set me up for success for, you know, a couple decades of training indigenous forces overseas. You know, I see some organizations, whether it's service related or just individuals, that look at indigenous people as a liability out the gate. And I get that. I get the sense of that, and I get that perception. But what I've always done is gone, man, before I even teach a guy how to use a gun or to have a resilient mindset, maybe I should break bread with this dude. Maybe I should, you know, drink chai with this guy, learn about his family, and do all the things that we naturally do when building like esprit de corps. And that loyalty and that value creates a different type of relationship. And for me, to be honest, I just didn't want to get shot in the back in a gunfight with an indigenous element. And so I learned very quickly, if you started communicating a certain way, you build relationships, that lent itself into optimizing and capitalizing on special operations type mission sets, but also that translated into civilians. I mean, a lot of military guys have a military mindset. I completely get that. I still do. But you can't communicate to a Ranger private like you would a civilian, or you'll very quickly lose your customer base and you'll build a bad reputation. So long of the short is a lot of time, a lot of experience in making mistakes and getting it wrong, which I think now, you know, whether it's an outliers 10,000 hours kind of thing, I'm just now starting to figure it out.
Yeah, but you know, it's funny because as I've heard in other interviews that you've done, the one thing you applied, you're somebody who applied their military training to the entrepreneurial world, and that's such a great if you can figure that out, it's such a great way to do that. And the reason this is important for people, I know people want me to get into, you know, the state of the world and where we're at right now, but I think it's important that people understand this. It's, you know, you were really well prepared on planning and logistics and, you know, all of that. And the way you approached your business at the beginning, where you did all the upfront work to understand a new skill set and crawl, walk, run it. And, you know, you didn't just wing it and go. You actually had a very detailed plan. And the reason I know that is just to see how you were ready for everything that's happened to you. And you've had tremendous success so far. And I think it's only the start. But I think a lot of it goes to that idea of planning. And I think that's very important also when people need to think about, if they've never looked at this subject before of being self-reliant, you can't just jump in. You've got to actually, you know, do the crawl, walk, run on it.
Yeah. As a Green Beret, even as a young infantryman, I learned very early on in Ranger school and platoon operations, squad operations, team operations, that we should do contingency-based planning, where we plan for things to go wrong. A lot of units still plan for things to go right. And in contingency-based planning, not only am I formulating the idea or the concept of the contingency, you know, what do I do when things go wrong, but I'm backing that up with the proper service and support to ensure that not only can I fluidly navigate that plan to the contingency, but I'll be just as successful. So what I've done in business is adopted that same resilience and always having an adaptable, fluid plan that works. And so I'm prepared for the worst case scenario and diversifying across different spectrums of business. And I don't need any one system or any one action arm to succeed. It all complements each other, you know, at the same time. And that synergy is important. But what I learned in the military, especially in planning, is you can't plan enough. And when you do plan for things to go wrong. And that's what I've done. So what you'll see in our success, which is perceived success, is a lot of businesses are getting hung up because they don't have the backup plan. They're not prepared to flex, at least fluidly. And seemingly we are able to navigate those tough times and just get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was interesting. It's cool to watch the evolution, and I've been aware of you for a couple of years, and it's really interesting to see this new group of vets coming out, and some of them just really killing it, just doing a great job. Understanding the environment right now, understanding how to communicate, using social media in a positive way. I know you've had your challenges with it, as everybody has, and it's hard getting this information out in a world where you can be censored like that, and you've done a great job at it. I think what's interesting is your message of self-reliance is, you couldn't have picked a more perfect time in our country for this to happen. What happened in the last 18 months has just been insane. And stuff that was unthinkable just, 2 years ago is now the norm, And I know this because there's a conference, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. There's a conference that I go to every year. It's for a big, well-known guy. He has a huge elite group of people that pay a ton of money to go to this thing. And I've been training them in self-protection, my version of self-protection, for 10 years. Always been super positive, always been super great. In fact, it's hard to train them in that environment because things are so positive and they're having so much fun in other areas. This year, completely different. The message was completely different. The whole idea is, hey, prepare for winter. It's coming right now. It's going to be, they're predicting 8 years. They're telling, these are top 1%ers, and they're all buying land. They're all making sure that they have their own water sources. They all make sure that have generators. They're preparing for outages. They're preparing for unrest. They're doing things that they've never been comfortable doing before, like getting, training in firearms and self-protection. And some of them are also getting, dogs because they can afford, the best. And I've never seen them so serious about the subject of self-protection. This would have been unthinkable to even have that conversation with these people maybe 18 months ago. It would be like, I felt I was at a prepper conference at one place from the early 2000s, the way these guys were talking. So many people are behind the curve. We've had all these new people buying guns. And the one thing that I just loved what I heard you talking about was the fact that, yeah, but the thought process. Okay, now you have this stuff. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to train? How are you going to do that? Your company really is dedicated to that. And I know it's something that you're just there, but how are you seeing it right now? Are you seeing people just clamoring for this type of information?
Yeah, we've seen a significant scale and a change. I mean, I made the comment a couple of weeks ago that, at the beginning of the year, this year, end of last year, I was a radical extremist and someone who was paranoid. And this year, I'm just right. And what I've realized, we don't have to push. We don't have to push fear, and we don't have to monger over this idea of things going to happen, because we're living in this turbulent time where we just push reality. And so if you look at statistics, for example, in crime, I mean, this is in your wheelhouse. Nowhere and no time in history have we needed to focus on self-protection more so than now. I mean, crime in the most crime-ridden cities and states is up 50%. And that's from a high rate already of crime and homicides and violent assaults. But that tells you kind of the symptom of the overarching problem, which is the effect of culture, and that effect of culture on policy. And, whether it's whatever you're looking for as the source of that problem, the symptoms are the same. And we're seeing those symptoms more and more in homelessness and crime and disaffected people and suicide rates. The list goes on. And so all you have to do is pay attention. But what I tell people is, you don't need to prepare for paranoia. You need to prepare for self-reliance. And that you should be doing anyway. So when people have the conversation and they're like, well, you guys are fear mongering because it's your business. Look, nothing that we teach has changed. The message since the beginning origins of the company in 2015 when I was leaving the CIA is exactly the same. The difference is there's more context. Now the people who are taking the training, they go, oh, well, in 2015, I wouldn't have taken it serious, or I wouldn't have taken it at all. Now I'm taking it serious because it means more. And so I think we're going to see more systematic issues, especially in these urban populations, that are going to grossly affect everybody, including people who are getting off grid and more rural. And if you're not preparing for your own self-reliance, you're just making a mistake. I think that's what we should be doing anyway as a culture, because any tethering or any umbilical cord to systems and institutions is setting you up for failure in the first place.
Yeah, I think everybody saw evidence of that, in multiple cities across the board. We're here in Las Vegas, and my wife is a chief with Metro, and she heads up Homeland Security. She got SWAT, K9, all the intel groups and stuff. And I've never been more happy to live in a city where the sheriff is an elected official. He's the second most powerful person in the state, and he made a very clear statement on how he was going to handle any of the unrest or protests and stuff. And other friends of mine that live in other cities, and I know a lot of people in the industry, it's been shocking to hear some of the stuff that happened. And so like you said, you don't need to focus on fear. It's already there. You just have to say, hey, listen, this happened. You got to pass. Basically, you're still here. You're out there, but listen, it's not going to stop. Meaning we can just see it right now. And I don't mean to think like everything's going to always be erupting, but look how quickly things just got turned upside down, without even talking about natural events and other things that we normally deal with. The social unrest, when police officers are not responding because they're told they can't respond in certain cities, when a woman is stuck with her kids with a mob surrounding her car and she's on 911, they're saying, sorry, we can't send anybody. That's a surreal situation, but these are all real events that happened on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, that was a turning point for me personally, because we operate in a sovereign nation, courtesy of the liberty and freedoms that we're born into, and to live in a world where first responders can't do their job because they're being told not to do their job is a new set of circumstances that reminds me of non-sovereign countries that are hotbeds of radical extremism in many forms, whether it's criminal entities, radical ideology, the list goes on. And so those symptoms are something to pay attention to. And if you want to get ahead, a lot of the things that people get bogged down with emotionally are outside of their control, but there's many things that we could do that are within our control.
So in that vein, we've got all these new gun owners, and what I thought was really interesting was a substantial portion of that were young Black women that bought this, and they felt it obviously in these urban areas where they just saw things collapsing. And a lot of those areas are the ones that are going to be the hardest hit, especially with the moves to defund the police and a lot of the things that you see happening. What's interesting is, two things happen. Either people buy it, they think it's like a remote control for self-protection, and they leave it in the box and they never even, hopefully they put it in the safe, but they don't ever do anything with it. They don't train with it. They don't, most of I was just saying a large majority of them probably haven't done anything remotely that you'd consider even basic training with the firearms. Or they will go to the range and they will just do, just kind of in the box training, just punching paper on targets with no real thought process behind it. It's just an operating a tool, basically. What I thought was so great, I heard you in an interview talking, I hope you'd share it with our audience. The hard questions are never asked, like, hey, how are you really going to use this? And do you know what this is? And how would you make the decision to actually deploy this? And, you really think about the ramifications. Where do you see, especially with people now, they buy things through fear, they want to get training, people that are coming, what are you seeing from an approach that they're not seeing, that they don't understand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I found shocking, but I've tried to tackle over the last couple of years. More gun owners this last, we'll call it fiscal year, than any time in history, which a lot of people that are Second Amendment advocates would say that's a great thing. And I believe that self-protection and empowering yourself with that self-protection, especially that tool, is a great thing. But the education is paramount, because now with that fear, a lot of people, like buying a first aid kit, they fall in love with that piece of equipment, that tool, and it makes them more complacent, because they go, well, I have that tool, and they put it in the trunk of their car. You know, they have that gun, it sits in the box in the shelf or somewhere where they could demonstrate or show it, but they don't have a grander understanding of the consequence. And one of the ways I discovered this narrative and kind of this whole deal was I started seeing social media influencers doing these little tactical niches, like these little content pieces where they're shooting guns. And in this particular piece, it happened to be a rubber dummy. And it was a special operations guy that was teaching this retracted gun, right? This idea or concept of retracting the gun down at the hip and then basically point shooting in close proximity a threat. And I remember I asked the guy at a training course, I said, hey, so you think that's cool because it's a hashtag, it's an IGTV piece of content. You like it, you comment about it, but give me the tactical consideration for when you would use that. When would you use that? And he goes, well, like, let me give you an example. If I was in a bar and a guy headbutted me, I would do that. And then I went, oh, wow. You do realize if you had the gun in a bar, you would be committing a crime, because in most states you can't have a concealed carry weapon in a place that serves alcohol. But to each their own. What's more significant is a guy who headbutts you and you use the appropriate amount of force and you shoot them, which is not using the appropriate amount of force, you would likely go to prison, or at least manslaughter, if not on trial for murder. And I said, why is that your default? Like, why haven't we focused on hands? Like, why haven't we focused on other tactics that get me to the point in which I feel like I have to use my pistol for self-defense? And what I realized in the totality of everything is most people have never asked themselves the question, when would I actually use deadly force? Most people, if you ask them and you said, hey, when are you going to draw the pistol out of your waistband and use deadly force? They would say, they would give you legal jargon. They would give you a protocol or doctrine. And I get that side of it, but I want to know literally what it's going to be, that decision point when you decide in your head that you're flipping the switch and that you're taking somebody's life. What is that? And nobody has an answer. And in fact, the most perceived capable people have the least amount of answers. So what I started doing is before I even taught tactics, is I had the conversation. I would give them a scenario and I would say, hey, everybody stand up. We walk through this scenario together. And I would give them more information than they would receive themselves in an elevated state of stress. And they would use deadly force. And typically they would use deadly force when they shouldn't have used deadly force. But I'm not there to judge them. What I'm there to do is give them context and perspective. If you shoot at a dark figure without positively identifying if it's friend or foe, you're running the risk of killing a loved one, a neighbor, or somebody you just don't want to kill. So have you ever asked yourself the question, when would be the criteria for me to use deadly force? And if you haven't, then that starts the journey to lead you into all the training segments that would be necessary to do this. Because likely if you talk to your spouse and you said, honey, if somebody kicked in the door right now, what would you do? And your husband, who's a third degree black belt in something, he'd go, oh, I would beat him up. That's what I would do. And he goes, well, what if they had a gun? Oh, well, I'd use our gun. Well, honey, your gun is inside the bedroom locked in a box because we got kids. Oh, well, maybe I should lock the door. Or maybe we should have the conversation and work through identifying all the things that we think we know, but we literally don't know. And that's the start point for what I think is this field of expertise, that's preparedness. Because in conversations and asking, hey, fire safety plan, what is it? Oh, honey, we don't have one. Well, maybe we should figure this out. You start identifying the weakness in your game. And I take that cue from after action reviews, where the entire intent after a raid or after a hostage rescue in training was to identify weaknesses to make you better, not to stroke your ego or tap yourself on the back and high five and go, we feel accomplished, because there's always work to do. And I think a lot of the times when you look at a tool, that gives us this complacency where we go, oh, that's going to solve the problems, when in reality, you just started the problems. I mean, there's a lot more things that you need to create and problem sets and answering the question.
Yeah, it's, there's an incident here in Vegas, and I think BJ Baldwin. And that was one of those things that when I saw that, you could tell the difference between somebody who, and a civilian, but you could tell the difference that training that he received, was spot on, the way he responded to that. Because obviously being, married to my wife and stuff, we get those reports before anything else happens, and talk to responding officers and everything. And I don't think people really understand when they're having their fantasies about what it's like to actually use violence, what it's like to actually be responsible for each round that comes out of that gun. And the mind, the type of work you have to put in, thought-wise about this ahead of time, because this is not just cool shit that you go, bounce off of a couple of still targets and you look really cool. There's real consequences to using these things, and using them at the wrong time, brandishing them. You've got, I tell my people all the time, you've got so much more to lose than whoever you're focusing on, because, you make the wrong move at that point, deploying something when you don't need it, or using violence in a way that isn't justified, it's going to absolutely turn your life upside down.
Yeah, that's the begging question, right? When you condition yourself to shoot paper and still, a lot of people disassociate the consequence. What are we really doing when we're training to kill people that are potentially threatening our lives, and we're training to use deadly force? And the objective is not just the technical skill set, but also all of the other elements that get you out of that bad situation in the first place. And often what we find in self-defense is when people have to use deadly force, there's many steps prior to the tipping point that could have been avoided to avoid that confrontation in the first place. So really, in popular culture, it's popular because it looks cool to shoot a gun and hit steel and hit paper and to do all these cool things. But what they don't show you is the litigation. What they don't show you is the consequences of taking another human's life. Now, I'm not advocating that you shouldn't train, you shouldn't do these things in the first place. But what I'm saying is it's a lot more broader than that. And if we're even talking about being better prepared, it's not just this one singular idea that statistically is very improbable. It's all of the things, and it's collective. You only got so much time in the day. What are you spending your time on? I see a lot of people spending time on draw strokes, sub-second draw strokes out of concealed carry, shooting a still target, but I don't see them applying tourniquets. I don't see them working on observation skills or combatives and self-defense, physical self-defense. And so it's like your preparedness game is a holistic approach. It's never one singular element. And a lot of guys who go into Fieldcraft and they go, well, Mike's a special operations guy. He's a cool guy because he does these cool mission sets. What they don't see is the isolation, the military decision-making process, the contingency-based training, the enablers, the service support, the list goes on and on and on. And that's what we try to bring to this preparedness game, is this culture of preparedness, not necessarily the coolest facet that's going to make the most money.
Yeah, and that's what's unique about your group. Again, I don't need to say this, and I'm really not doing it because I'm talking to you. I'm just being really truthful. I've seen a lot. I've been seeing a lot of people do this over the years, and your approach is so well thought out, especially for you're giving the best of the best information as far as it's been developed in the military, with organizations that spend ungodly amounts of cash to get those answers. You're able to convey that to civilians in an absolutely useful way, but not go Hollywood on it, not give any false confidence or anything like that. Just be really sober and make people really understand, because the goal is, and I hate to give credit to this old codger buddy of mine, Tony Blauer, but I got to say, he said it best one time. And he said it to a woman that was annoying him on a flight one time when he was trying to sleep. And she was saying how much she wanted, he made the mistake of telling her that he trained self-defense. She said, oh my God, I always want to train self-defense, and Tony just stopped her and he goes, no, you didn't. He goes, if you did, you'd be like me. He goes, you'd be doing this for years, and it'd be part of you in there. He goes, what I think you meant to say is you'd like to learn how to live a life where you minimize the chance that self-defense would ever be necessary. He goes, now I can help you with that information. And, that's really how I've approached things. And I get that essence from you guys. Like, your trainers are all spot on guys, just really good. But what I love is it's like part of your mission statement, but the mindset that you guys convey, you really care, you give a shit. You want people to do well, but you also want them to understand, hey, this is not Hollywood. There's real ramifications to using this stuff. And that's such a hard thing to do and still be successful. And you've really done it. And it's great. And I wish more people had that approach to the subject matter, because the cool factor and let's see if I can beat my last time and all that other stuff, it really doesn't apply when your life's on the line,
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tim. I mean, you and Tony Blauer, you guys are OGs of this whole entire industry, and we're doing it before it was even cool or even popular, right? Now it's becoming so popular that a lot of the guys who have come up and tried to be, it's almost like this ebb and flow where there was a period of time where guys came out of the woodwork and they could be flashy, but that didn't last long because you could identify who they were. And that was one of the best things about social media, is you couldn't hide.
Right.
And so if you were original and you were and you were coming from a point of trying to help people and you had the good values in it, you made it through the long haul. But then you had all these guys who they came to the top, they surfaced, and they went away. And what I've noticed in our paths of doing this moving forward is I've had a whole bunch of personalities, a whole bunch of companies, of people doing it for the wrong reasons. And I think that's the start point, right? My start point was when I went to combat, when I went to war, I realized how important life truly was. But I also came from an organization or a community and culture that I felt like I belonged. And in civilian life, when I transitioned, I quickly realized that doesn't exist in civilian life. No. It's everybody out for themselves, and especially in entrepreneurship. So if I could take some of the tactics that I learned in a very positive community, at least in my experience, and apply that to business, but apply it to our mission and our purpose, then it would be a positive thing. Now, I still get schooled by, Kyle Lamb blows up my phone every once in a while because he's like, why are you commenting on these trolls? And you're doing the wrong thing. Keep your head straight, your head down, and move forward. I'm like, all right, Roger that, Sergeant Major. I still have to calibrate and check myself. But we take pride in, one, doing it, but not taking ourselves so seriously that we can't communicate it. I don't think any tactic, any piece of equipment, any culture or any company can make traction without creating this reliable, but also convenient and comfortable environment for people to learn. Some things are just hard to teach, and I get that, but there is an approach. There's a different tactic. I used to tell my team guys, my team guys would come to me and they would have heartache or angst with whether it was indigenous people they were working with or even American people they were working with. And they would be frustrated. And I would say to them, you're a Green Beret. You're an unconventional, irregular warfare operator. If you're coming to me because you can't manipulate and you can't control your environment, you've lost. You're talking about a person, or a different kind of person that has an incentive. If you understand their incentive, if you could break bread and find common ground, you could build a relationship. What you're doing is trying to smash the shell with a rock. There takes grace, there takes effort, and there takes compassion and empathy sometimes. And that's what Green Berets do. And so my mindset always from the beginning is, if there's a way to cooperate and find common ground, then there's a way to collaborate. And that's our mission statement. And there's a lot of toxic people in this industry. I hate to see it, because we're all in it for the same general reasons. And I just wish more of the industry was like that. And, I try my best every day to bring different industries together, different corporations together, different people together. And it's just a mantra that we live. I'm lucky that as the leader of the company, they make my job easy, because I have good people that I'm surrounded with that get the job done, that get the mission done.
So, hey, that's a great place for it to end for part one. Mike really laying out, that idea of the comfortable learning environment. And I think that's where a lot of people, coming out of the military as trainers, a lot of them have disdain for people that don't have, the knowledge base that they have. It doesn't mean they're bad guys. It's just they're not as good at conveying that. Mike is very good at being able to take these difficult subjects and put them in a very user-friendly way for you. If you want to hear more about Mike's background, and it's fascinating. He had an incredible career. The only reason I'm not going into those stories with him is because he's done those elsewhere much better. And I really wanted to focus on the idea of self-protection, teaching, and what's so important, and why at this time in our history, this information is important. I think Mike really has some great insights to that. But if you want to, I would suggest probably going to the Cleared Hot podcast. It's Andy Stump's podcast, former team guy. A hilarious individual, by the way. He has one IG account called Tactical Asshole, and it's funny. It's funny as hell. Good sense of humor. But those two guys go into Mike's career. Mike did about 3 different interviews with Andy, and they go deep in the woods with spec ops terminology and everything. So if you have a interest in that, Mike does talk at that level easily. The guy's highly competent. But what's interesting is he doesn't do that with his clients. He keeps it very understandable. He wants to make sure they get it. Very unique talent. Anyways, so part 2 is coming up. You're going to really enjoy that. But, again, it's rare when you meet a guy, especially with Mike's background, that's able to kind of just be as calm and as, open to really helping people out. So anyways, hope you enjoyed part 1. Now listen, remember, go to timlarkin.com, get your free masterclass, and start putting together your self-protection strategy. As you can see, it's really important. We need more than ever to make sure that we are vigilant about our own self-protection. And a great way to start is to start with a masterclass. Till next time, stay safe. All the best.